Dark chosen ones, you have 3 secret marks even demons recognize. There's a reason your life has never felt normal. A reason why you've always sensed something different about yourself, even when you couldn't put it into words. While others moved through life seeking comfort, approval, or validation, you moved through fire. You've been rejected, misunderstood, broken down, and rebuilt more times than you can count. And still you rise. Still you feel something ancient pulsing in your blood. That's not your imagination. That's not an overactive mind. That's the call of the dark chosen one. And if you're watching this, it's because you were meant to hear what I'm about to tell you. We don't choose the path of the dark chosen. It chooses us. And it doesn't come with a manual. It comes with chaos. It comes with pain. It comes with silence that stretches for years and wounds that feel like they'll never heal. But beneath all of that suffering is something sacred, something terrifyingly powerful. And the world doesn't talk about this power, not because it isn't real, but because it is. So real that even the darkest forces in the spiritual realm, forces you've never seen, but have always felt, recognize you by 3 secret marks. They don't need to see your face. They don't need to hear your voice. They feel your energy, and they know this one is different. This one is a threat. This one is marked.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
But before I tell you what those marks are, I need you to understand something even more important. You are not cursed. You are not broken. You are activated. The pain, the isolation, the deep sense of not belonging, it was never a punishment. It was preparation. You are being formed in the shadows for a mission that light alone could never prepare you for. Because some battles cannot be won with love and light alone. Some battles require someone who has walked through hell and come back with wisdom. Someone who knows the language of darkness, not to spread it, but to transform it. So what are these secret marks? The first is energetic. It's not visible to the eye, but it's burned into your aura. It's the frequency of karmic resilience. It means you've lived many lives, and in those lives you've endured unspeakable things. Not because you were weak, but because your soul chose the highest curriculum. You didn't come here for ease. You came here for mastery. And that frequency is encoded in your field. Entities, spirits, even people with spiritual sight, they feel it. It makes them uncomfortable, or drawn to you, or both. That's why you've attracted so many strange encounters. Why you've walked into a room and felt the energy shift instantly. Why people have projected their pain onto you without cause. You trigger something ancient in them. Not because you're dark, but because you carry the mirror of truth. And the truth terrifies those still living in illusion. The second mark is psychological. It shows up in your mind, in the way you process reality. You don't think like others. You don't accept the surface explanation. You question everything. Your thoughts are layered, multidimensional. And that's not a flaw, it's a form of spiritual technology. Most people are programmed to follow. You are wired to perceive. You see through lies, even when they're wrapped in spiritual language. You sense manipulation before it's spoken. And because of that, you're often labeled as too intense, too sensitive, too paranoid. But what they call paranoia is your protection. It's your inner knowing refusing to be gaslit. And that inner knowing, that's a mark. It means you're not under the illusion anymore. And when you're not under the illusion, you become a threat to those who still are. The third mark is emotional. It's your capacity to feel the full spectrum of human experience without shutting down. You felt grief that should have destroyed you, rage that could have consumed you, compassion that nearly broke your heart open, and still you stayed. You felt it all. That's not weakness. That's power. That's emotional alchemy. And demons, real ones, energetic parasites, lower entities, they can't stand that kind of emotional depth. Because emotion is energy in motion. And when you know how to move energy through your body without repressing it, you become a master of transmutation. That's the greatest threat to any dark force. Not a person who avoids the dark, but a person who has made peace with it and knows how to move through it without being controlled by it. These three marks, energetic, psychological, emotional, they are the signs that you are not just waking up. You are remembering. You are remembering who you were before the world taught you to forget. And that remembering is dangerous to systems built on control. Because a dark chosen one who has gone through initiation and come out the other side, that's someone who can't be manipulated anymore. Someone who doesn't need external validation. Someone who listens to the voice of the soul over the noise of the crowd. And that right there is the most radical act of spiritual rebellion. But don't get it twisted. Being marked doesn't mean you're superior. It means you've been called to serve in a different way. You don't get the luxury of floating through life in spiritual bypass. You're called to walk into the darkest spaces within yourself, within others, and bring light through truth. That means owning your shadows. That means confronting your trauma. That means holding space for rage, for grief, for failure, and still saying, I'm not done. That's what makes you dangerous, not your perfection, your resilience. And maybe you're wondering right now, why me? Why this path? Why these marks? The answer is simple but not easy, because you could handle it. Because you chose it long before this lifetime. Because your soul knew that the only way to break the chains of generational, psychic and karmic bondage was to become the one who could walk through it all and not be consumed. You are not here to be liked. You are here to liberate. And liberation often looks like madness to those who are still in chains. So now the real question becomes, what will you do with these marks? Will you hide them? Will you water yourself down to fit in? Or will you own them fully, fiercely, unapologetically? Because the moment you do, everything changes. Why your suffering was a setup, the hidden training grounds of dark chosen ones. You didn't stumble into suffering by accident. The pain you've carried didn't come from nowhere. It wasn't random. It wasn't meaningless. I know when you were in the thick of it, it felt cruel. It felt like abandonment. Like the universe had forgotten you while everyone else seemed to be thriving, smiling, praying their way into bliss. But for you, no amount of positive thinking could erase the weight. No spiritual bypass could numb the ache. And that's because your suffering wasn't punishment, it was preparation. And a hidden initiation, a sacred forging. You weren't being destroyed. You were being shaped in the hidden training grounds of the dark chosen. See, people talk about awakening like it's a sunrise. Like one day you just open your eyes and everything is clear and beautiful. But that's not how it happens for us. For those marked in shadow, the awakening feels more like an earthquake. It's the kind of awakening that comes from losing everything: your identity, your relationships, your sense of control. It comes from being brought to your knees, not once, but again and again, until your ego cracks open and your soul finally steps forward. That's not weakness. That's a different kind of strength. One the world doesn't recognize, but the universe rewards. Think about it. Every moment you broke, every time you screamed into the void, every time you asked, "Why me?" You were being trained. Trained to endure, yes, but more than that, trained to see. Because pain activates a kind of sight that comfort never can. It sharpens your awareness. It peels back the layers of illusion. When you suffer deeply, you stop looking at life through the lens of what you were taught, and you start seeing it for what it really is. You see the energetic patterns. You notice the way people wear masks. You sense when someone is lying, even if they're smiling. That's not paranoia. That's perception forged through fire. And that fire didn't just burn you, it refined you. You became more sensitive, but also more discerning. You became more compassionate, but also more boundaried. You learned how to navigate darkness not by avoiding it, but by walking through it with your eyes wide open. That's why people come to you for guidance, even if they don't understand why. That's why strangers tell you their secrets. That's why you've always felt like an old soul in a room full of sleepwalkers. Because whether you realize it or not, you've been trained to hold space for others in a way most can't. Not because you read it in a book, but because you lived it. And here's the deeper truth: some lessons cannot be taught in the light. Some forms of power can only be unlocked in the dark. When you've been through betrayal, you learn how to detect deception. When you've been through abandonment, you learn how to anchor in your own self-worth. When you've been through grief, you learn how to love without attachment. These are not just coping mechanisms, but these are spiritual technologies. They are the tools of the dark chosen. And once you've been initiated by suffering, no one can take that wisdom from you. But there's a choice you have to make now. Because suffering, by itself, doesn't make you powerful. It's what you do with that suffering that determines your path. Will you become bitter? Will you use your pain as a weapon? Or will you transmute it into wisdom real, embodied wisdom that can't be faked or copied? You have to ask yourself, am I ready to stop surviving and start serving? Am I ready to use what I've been through to light the path for others still trapped in the dark? Because that's the final layer of the training, to realize that your pain was never just about you. It was about who you're here to become for the collective. Every dark chosen one has a mission, and that mission is never rooted in ego. But it's not about being the most enlightened. It's about being the most real, the most grounded, and the most able to hold paradox. Because the world doesn't need more gurus. It needs guides. People who have been to the edge of their own destruction and still chose to stand up and say, "I'm not done." So if you're still hurting, if you're still healing, that's okay. You don't rush the process, but also don't underestimate what all of this has been preparing you for. The betrayals, the breakdowns, the nights you couldn't breathe, those were sacred tests. Not from a cruel universe, but from a wise one. A universe that knew what kind of vessel it was forming. A universe that said, this one is strong enough to remember in the dark. So let me ask you something that only your soul can answer. What if your suffering wasn't happening to you, but through you, for the sake of something bigger? The demon test, how lower entities identify and target the marked ones. There's a hidden war happening in the unseen, not with swords and guns, but with energy, with frequency, with intention. And whether you believe it or not, whether you're ready or not, if you are one of the marked ones, one of the dark chosen, you are already in it. You felt it. In the heaviness that creeps in without warning, in the sudden anxiety that makes no sense, in the dreams that feel more real than waking life. These are not random. These are spiritual diagnostics. And the more awakened you become, the more visible you are not just to the higher realms, but to the lower ones too. The entities that feed on fear, confusion, doubt, they see you. They know you, and they test you. The demon test is not a myth. It's not fantasy. It's a real, energetic process that happens when you begin to rise into your purpose. These entities, some ancient, some created through collective unconsciousness, are drawn to marked ones not because you are weak, but because you are powerful. They see your light, yes, but even more than that, they sense your potential to disrupt the systems of fear and control they thrive on. You are a threat, not because you shout louder, but because you see deeper. You don't just believe in truth, you embody it. And that embodiment sends out a signal, a frequency, like a beacon in the dark. One that says, this one is awakening. This one remembers. And so they come, not in the way Hollywood shows you, not always with growls and shadows. Sometimes they come as thoughts, as doubts, as whispers in your own voice telling you you're not enough. They slip into your mind when you're tired, when you've been betrayed, when you're isolated. That's not coincidence. That's timing. These entities are opportunists. They wait for emotional openings. They wait for unprocessed trauma. And then they feed, not on your soul, but on your energy, on your confusion, on your willingness to believe the worst about yourself. That's the test. Not whether you can avoid the dark, but whether you can stay conscious inside of it. And let's be honest, there were moments when you nearly gave in. Moments when the weight was too much. When the inner voices were too loud. When you almost believed the lie that you were broken beyond repair. But something inside you, something ancient, refused to let go. That was your soul. That was your true self, remembering its power, remembering its origin. And every time you chose to get back up, every time you chose to breathe through the fear instead of running from it, you passed a level of the demon test. Because here's the secret no one tells you. Demons don't fear your rituals. They don't fear your crystals or your sage. They fear your clarity. They fear your stillness. They fear your refusal to abandon yourself when everything around you says you should. That's real power. The kind that can't be bought, taught, or faked. The kind that only those who have been through the fire can carry. And when you carry that kind of presence, you don't even have to fight. Your vibration does the work. Your very being becomes a boundary. But that doesn't mean the tests stop. In fact, the more you rise, the more subtle the attacks become. They shift from obvious sabotage to seductive distractions. They come in the form of relationships that feel exciting but pull you off path, opportunities that look good but drain your spirit, even spiritual teachers who speak truth but live in shadow. That's when discernment becomes your sword. You must learn to feel what's behind the words, what's beneath the surface, because not everything that glitters is gold, and not every light worker is truly in the light. So what do you do when you're targeted? You anchor. You don't panic. You don't run. You ground. You come back into your body. You breathe. You ask, whose voice is this? Whose energy is this? Is this mine or something trying to enter through my fear? This is spiritual sovereignty. This is what the demon test is ultimately about. Will you collapse into fear, or will you rise into truth? And remember, being tested doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're growing. It means you're being entrusted with more spiritual authority, because only those who have walked through the underworld can guide others out of it. And if you're still here, still listening, still standing, then you've already proven that you are one of them. One of the few. One of the marked. One of the ones that even the unseen realms take seriously. So ask yourself, when the next test comes and will you forget who you are, or will you remember? Because the ones who remember, they don't just survive. They shift the entire frequency of this planet. You are the mirror they fear, becoming the shadow walker who transforms the world. Most people run from their shadows. They dress it up in light, tuck it behind affirmations, cover it with performance spirituality. But you were never meant to run. You were meant to walk straight into it. You were meant to enter the darkest rooms with your eyes open and your heart steady. Because you, Dark Chosen One, are not just here to heal yourself. You are here to become the mirror that reveals truth to a world built on illusion. And that mirror, it terrifies people. It terrifies entities. It terrifies the systems that rely on your silence. You are the mirror they fear, not because you judge, but because you reflect. You show people what they buried, but you bring up what's been denied. You awaken what's been suppressed for lifetimes. Just your presence can make someone confront the parts of themselves they've been hiding from. That's why you've triggered so many people without even trying. Why you've been blamed, shamed, cast out. Not because you were wrong, but because you saw too much. You felt too much. And the world isn't used to someone who doesn't wear masks. But you didn't come here to blend in. You came here to break the cycle. And breaking cycles isn't glamorous. It's brutal. It means walking away from comfort. It means being the one in your family who says, "This pattern ends with me." It means facing trauma that isn't even yours, ancestral, collective, karmic, and saying, "I'll transmute this." You are the one who volunteered to hold the line, to stand in both worlds, the seen and unseen, and bring truth to both. That's why your path has been so heavy. That's why your victories have been so hard-won, because you are not ordinary. You are a shadow walker, a bridge between realms, a soul forged in both fire and silence. And now the world is shifting. The illusion is cracking. The noise is louder than ever, but beneath it, people are waking up. They're looking for something real, not polished, not filtered. Real. And that's where you come in. Because you carry a kind of medicine that can't be mass-produced. A kind of wisdom that doesn't come from books. It comes from scars. From sitting with your own madness and choosing not to run. And facing your own darkness and not letting it swallow you. You've done what most are too afraid to even attempt. You've met yourself in the shadow. And because of that, you can now lead others through theirs. But don't mistake leadership for performance. You're not here to be worshipped. You're here to be real. And to show others that awakening isn't always pretty, but it's always worth it. And that healing isn't linear, but it's liberating. That being chosen doesn't mean you're better, it means you're responsible. You're responsible for your frequency. Responsible for your impact, responsible for staying aligned even when no one's watching. That's what makes you powerful, not your visibility, not your followers, but your integrity in the unseen. So what now? What do you do with all this knowing, all this power? You embody it, not by shouting louder, but by living deeper. You become the person who doesn't flinch when others are in pain, who doesn't judge when others are lost, who doesn't run when things get uncomfortable. You hold the mirror, not to punish, but to liberate. You become a living invitation for others to meet their own truth. And in doing so, you don't just change lives, you start to shift realities. Because when a dark chosen one fully awakens, when they stop hiding their marks and start walking in full remembrance of who they are, the entire frequency around them changes. Rooms feel different. Conversations go deeper, but timelines shift. And that's not magic. That's alignment. That's what happens when a shadow walker stops apologizing for their depth and starts owning it. So, if you've ever questioned your path, doubted your strength, or wondered whether the suffering was worth it, let this be your answer. You were never too much. You were never too broken. You were becoming the one this world needs most. Now go be the mirror they fear, and the light they never saw coming.